BlueDragonFive.
And we're here to honor the legacy of a man who was just taken from us way, way, way too soon. Jon Schnepp. Jon Schnepp died yesterday, unfortunately, after a massive stroke. Dragon, Jon Schnepp was the creator of Metalocalypse, a very, very key contributor to AMC and Collider Movie Talk, the writer and director of The Death of Superman Lives, What Happened, and most importantly, Dragon, I think his lasting legacy is going to be he was a pillar of the geek community. He was a champion of the geek community. I kind of called him sort of the next Kevin Smith, kind of like the next in the lineage of Kevin Smith, where where he would champion geek culture and really like be a beacon of geek culture and like what it means to be a geek and why we should celebrate geekdom and celebrate the sweatiness of it all. He coined the term sweaties, for God's sake. So, Dragon, suffice to say, I am absolutely heartbroken. We talked about Schnepp a couple days ago when we did our Flash podcast when he was in critical condition. Things weren't looking good. I was kind of fearing for the worst, and indeed the worst did happen. And Dragon, I gotta say, I've been following Schnepp for about 5 years, roughly, way back from the AMC Movie Talk days. And I'm kind of crushed, man. I'm kind of crushed. I'll let you get your piece in a second, but I just kind of need to say my piece on it. So AMC Movie Talk, there were two pillars of AMC Movie Talk that I always watched for. I watched for Campia and I watched for Schnepp, the two Johns, if you will. Now, Campia was kind of like the outspoken asshole of the group, you know what I mean? And I love him for that, and I always love Campia for that. Campia is kind of like he's not afraid to speak his mind. He's not afraid to get into arguments with people. He's not afraid to call people out, and I really love his abrasiveness. He's got like kind of like a unique flavor of personality in the community. But Jon Schnepp, Dragon, Jon Schnepp was the opposite. Jon Schnepp was just this giant, lovable teddy bear. He was one of the first guest hosts they had on AMC Movie Talk way back in the day, and he quickly cemented himself as a permanent fixture. And Dragon, I just remember the first time that I saw Jon Schnepp, it was one of those things where it's like, even if you've never heard of the man before, he's just got such a comforting personality that you feel like you've like grown up with him. And throughout the AMC days, throughout the Collider days, he brought so many warm memories, so many of course I remember his sweaty nerd voice, like, oh gee, here's the thing, Dragon. Here's the thing about Schnepp that was interesting from a commentary point of view. He loved geek culture. He loved nerd culture. He loved all that stuff. He loved being a geek. What he didn't love, Dragon, was dissension. And so, as you can imagine, stuff like the Last Jedi situation really got under his skin, really bothered him. Stuff like people nitpicking and the whole idea of the cinema sins and all that. He really wasn't down for that kind of stuff. And so Jon Schnepp was a multifaceted individual where he would champion the geek culture, but at the same time, he would mock those who took geek culture too seriously, who would let geek culture ruin friendships with people or ruin perceptions of people. And Dragon, the thing that I regret the most now with Schnepp is ever since Campia left Collider and went out on his own, and I kind of fell out of watching Collider, mostly because the Schmoes Knows were the main ones running it. And it's not that I have a thing against the Schmoes Knows or anything. They're fine hosts. But it just didn't really feel the same without the outspoken voice that was John Campia. The Schmoes Knows seemed more kind of like, kind of like the safe commentators, if you will. The people who were going to kind of stick inside the lines. And Schnepp was one of the big guiding things. He was one of the big things on Collider that I was missing out on when I wasn't watching Collider. But at the end of the day, Dragon, when Schnepp, when Collider and John Campia both have hour-long shows covering what is essentially going to be the same movie news, I don't have time in my day to watch both. So unfortunately, Dragon, I've been watching John Campia for about a year, and I've kind of fallen off of watching Collider. And so that is why I'm equally heartbroken by all this, because I've gone a year not following Schnepp, and I kind of feel like I abandoned Schnepp in a way. And of course, Schnepp being so young at 51 years old when he died, and it being so sudden, like he went in for a routine hospital checkup and he came out with a massive stroke that ended his life. I mean, folks, the GoFundMe for the family is up in the video description. That's going to be very important. The cost of his hospital bills are astronomical. His fiance Holly really, really needs everyone's support right now. So do whatever you can. Even just sharing that link on your Facebook or whatever would be a big help. Dragon, I know that you're not nearly as invested as Jon Schnepp as I am, because you haven't followed him through Collider and AMC and all that. But just, if you want to kind of speak to him.
Yeah, sure. I do have familiarity with Jon Schnepp, just not as again not as intricate as all the kind of the podcasting adventures of Jon Schnepp. Or I guess kind of the commentator side of it. So Jon Schnepp, he struck me as kind of the ambassador of comic fandom. He just really was, just kind of the ambassador of fandom. That's really what he epitomized. He was a fan's fan. He just
Oh yeah.
he just tragically left us before his time, and I think we're all crushed. I mean, I was pulling for him. I really was. The guy had tenacity and determination. The guy was. We'll get into the reasons why a little later on. I mean, the guy impressed me so much. It's so funny that I kind of agree with the whole. He's kind of another Kevin Smith. Almost again, I keep wanting to say he's a next gen Kevin Smith, but technically he's 10 years older than Kevin Smith.
Yeah, I know it's weird. Yeah.
Well, not 10 years older, but he's still like a few years older than.
Yeah.
The Kevin Smith's always like that's the weird thing, because again, he felt so young and exuberant in how he went through things. He felt like he was almost like 10 years younger than Kevin Smith, but he wasn't. And that's the thing, Schnepp. Of course, other things that he had worked on, and he has a very interesting career, folks. I recommend kind of looking into it. He started with Space Ghost, Coast to Coast, which technically predates Adult Swim. Not a lot of people know that. Like it maintained on Adult Swim, but it predated it technically. You had Metalocalypse, of course. He directed on that. We were unsure before, but he had directed on it, didn't co-create, but he really
I think Metalocalypse, besides the AMC Movie Talk stuff, is going to be the thing he's most remembered for by fans, because that show just had a big fan base. I wasn't a part of that fan base. Nothing against the show, it just wasn't my thing, but I definitely think he's going to be missed from that.
Yeah, and of course he had just kind of working on Metalocalypse. He had gotten around to the other Adult Swim shows like Venture Brothers and Aqua Teen Hunger Force. And here's something impressive I forgot about. He directed. He was the other director on the Black Panther motion comic. Remember the motion comic you saw?
Oh yeah, sure.
He directed 2 out of the 6 of those. So he was again, those are very impressive, very good. And again, those are my go-to Black Panther stories before, not because they're motion comics. It's John Romita Jr.'s art, and I love that artist. So, I mean, that was kind of my go-to for Black Panther. Of
course, a great voice cast. Jimon Hunsu as Black Panther.
Certainly, I mean, it was Alfred Woodard. She was in that as well. Before pre-Luke Cage.
I know. I was about to say, ironically, both the main leads were
in the MCU.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And then Stan Lee having a cameo that's not just him playing himself.
He's playing a character, most certainly. Of course, here's the thing where I first really saw the guy in. I first saw him in Comic-Con episode. There was a documentary called Comic-Con Episode 4, A Fan's Hope. It was Morgan Spurlock did a documentary. The guy who did Super Size Me and all that stuff. The 30 days of this and that. Basically kind of capitalized on his fame. And again, Morgan Spurlock, he's good. He made this other thing called The Greatest Movie Ever Sold. The guy's a good filmmaker. I won't take that away from him. But Schnepp was in it. He was one of the various people interviewed. And that was a real. I highly recommend A Fan's Hope if you want to get a nice look at Schnepp, and he spoke again as the ambassador of fandom. Kevin Smith, people from it was from a certain year at the San Diego Comic Con.
Comic Con was Jon Schnepp's bread and butter, Dragon. He felt at home at Comic Con. You know what I mean? Comic Con was where he coined the term "schweddies." And that's one of the things, Dragon, that kind of strikes me about his death is the fact that it happened during a Comic Con, the fact that he wasn't at Comic Con. You know what I mean? Because God, I mean, just thinking about that, Dragon, it just adds an extra layer of tragedy.
I mean,
the fact that he was in the hospital in a coma when the thing that he loved was going on.
I mean, yes, I absolutely agree with you. And then, honestly, for me, but again, you can imagine this with a lot of his work, as you mentioned. Comic Con is the big lifeblood in the three main things that I knew Schnepp from, and kind of poetically as such. Again, I first knew him through this. Then of course, is one of his I'm sure there are fans of Metalocalypse, but I would say kind of his mass story, kind of like the thing that I think a lot of people also, if they've heard of it, they'll definitely remember him for. Is kind of his big opus. I think his big, well, his first. I'm pretty sure it's his first film, that one he directed and wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the project that again, so bitterly and so ironically, a project that he tried to get off the ground, tried to make work, and it didn't. But again, it was very, very tied into the Schweddies and the Comic Con, but also in Comic Con, San Diego specifically, very tied into the man's life. Again, the guy was a lifeblood of fandom and Comic Con. Again, I highly recommend that story because it feels like something. And I would have knowing Schnepp from the main film that he has done. I would easily assume, had I not known Spurlock did, I would easily assume that he did a Fan's Hope because he was very good, very interrelated, very tapped into kind of the spirit of fandom. It was follow like a few people's experience at Comic Con as these fractured storylines are all under the same roof. It was a really it's very compelling. I'd recommend it. It's like at a certain year of Comic Con. I want to say 2010. It was like 2009, 10, maybe 11. I think it was 9 though. It was like 2009.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so basically all sorts of guests and has like these really kind of striking backgrounds, and Schnepp was in one of those striking backgrounds. There's just like kind of nothing but white behind him, and he kind of utilized that for again the big work that I can really speak to. Death of Superman Lives. What happened? So, boy, so of course, Death of Superman Lives. As many of us had, especially after things like Look Up in the Sky, the story of Superman, or or when Superman Doomsday came out, there was this little documentary about the whole death of Superman in comics, and those are the only two times we really heard murmurs of the Superman Lives movie, the infamous Superman Lives movie that was never made, and Schnepp, again, being really tuned into the fandom, and of course Kevin Smith's story. Again, that's the big iconic, one of the big iconic things that people know about Kevin Smith, talking about pitching the story to John Peters and dealing with the whole dealing with the whole Superman Lives project and the draft that he wrote for the script and everything. Of course, Evening with Kevin Smith wonderfully tells that story. The giant mechanical spider and all. Not a lot was known about this project. It's basically Kevin Smith and the famous photo that Bryan Singer would show people, say, "Hey, we're not making this. You guys almost made this very bad, this infamous photo of Nick Cage like mid blink or like mid sneeze. It was mid blink, but I'm saying it could have practically been like mid sneeze the way it looks."
Well, that's the beautiful thing about Death of Superman Lives, Dragon, is it takes the one image that we all know of Nick Cage mid blink,
and it sells you on it.
Yeah, it sells you on it. And by the end of the movie, that's kind of its mission statement. By the end of the movie, you want to genuinely see something like that. And you think it's a really cool design that really would have worked and popped.
So to give some context about that, because basically this parallels what he went through as a filmmaker. This is Jon Schnepp, the filmmaker, folks. This is why some of the best qualities about the guy are tied into this story. So the way Death of Superman Lives, what happened began was he met a guy named Steve Johnson. Steve Johnson was the guy who created the various suits they were toying with for Superman, the rebirth suits, the suits that lit up and had the LEDs and everything in there, like kind of the circa 90s suits. He was the guy who designed Slimer from the Ghostbusters. He'd done creatures for John Carpenter's The Thing and Cronenberg stuff. I mean, Steve Johnson was a recognizable name, and and this is a testament to Jon Schnepp, the man here, where he befriended him, and basically he was like, he just kind of met him, and he kind of recognized him. He like Googled him on his phone or something, and he realized, oh my God, you're Steve Johnson. You worked on Superman Lives, and it was this really poignant moment where Johnson was afraid because he's had these interactions before, and he was afraid that, oh no, he's going to mock me or like ask me tons of questions like how bad the movie was and such and everything. But no, Schnepp was like the one guy who didn't mock him, he didn't make fun of him. Superman Lives, the one who was genuinely curious, and he befriended this man, and in befriending this man, Schnepp kind of came to a realization and talking to his buddies who again all said, "Oh man, it's doing a documentary. It's your wheelhouse." But you should they're kind of jokingly saying, "Oh, you should do a documentary, do a Kickstarter or something, right?" And Schnepp kind of realized, he's the only one who's going to tell this story because no one else is going to make this movie. Jon Schnepp was the only man open-minded enough to tell this story the way it needed to be told, and he wasn't a documentarian. Don't wrong, he worked in editing and in directing. So I mean, he had talent, but making a documentary, like a feature-length documentary, not like a bonus feature, like a full-fledged thing. That's difficulty. And I can look, I can speak to the difficulty, and not to the level that he went through. Believe me, he went through genuine difficulty. Anyway, he began the search. He began this Kickstarter, and this is where I intersect very, very infinitesimally with Jon Schnepp because he put out a Kickstarter which I had donated to. So again, Schnepp and this project was on my mind because I learned about it through Hollywood Babylon. Kevin Smith. He gave a shout out about this on Hollywood Babylon because they do a segment on Hollywood Babylon called Geek News where they talk about basically all the current news that's been coming out.
It's one of those projects that I remember him talking about for literally like 2 or 3 years on Collider and AMC, and I was just like, oh man, it sounds like such a great movie, like it sounds like the type of movie where if it actually got made, it would just be so easily digestible to watch and so rewatchable because of all the fascinating little intricacies to the story.
Certainly. Again, it might be 2012 this thing got started. I think it was 13. I'm not sure. Again, it was years ago, folks, and that's my point, is that he imagined this thing was going to take 8 months.
I want to say more 2012. That sounds more like around the time that AMC Movie Talk was going on.
So the point is, he thinks this is going to take like 8 months, and it takes like between 2 to 3 years to get this done. And again,
only because of a wealth of people that he got to interview. That's why it took so long.
Certainly. But also there were difficulties along the road as well. But you're right. The project kept kind of growing, getting better and better as it went along, thankfully. As in, the thing that fueled this project, folks, it was such a pure project. It was like a what if. Like, let's explore the what if. The what if that we've never really peered beneath the surface. It was like a Superman that we all assumed was going to be bad. And we thought we dodged the bullet. But, what if? It's just this, he had this goodwill and this ambition. It took him so far. Like Tim Burton, for example. Tim Burton was like at the top of the heap along with Nick Cage of people he thought he'd never get to. And he just kind of, people saw the tenacity and the goodwill of this project, and it made the word kind of went through the grapevine with the Kickstarter. And guys working on Big Eyes, Tim Burton was doing his movie Big Eyes, and the crew found this out, and they helped Schnepp. They let him down a path that would put him with Tim Burton, and it cost him. He had to buy a plane ticket to London, for his crew and such. It took him a while, and it cost him time, resources. I mean, from what I heard, and this is tragic, he sold his comic book collection. He ran out of money making this project. He dipped it even beyond the Kickstarter, from what I heard, and there were some hard times. Times where he was unsure if he was going to be able to make it back from London to go meet with Tim Burton. And of course, that the whole process, he achieved these monumental things. Like he got Tim Burton to let his guard down in an interview, like a real honest interview. He got John Peters, the X factor to the whole thing. He got John Peters to agree to put him in a headlock for the cover of the DVD. It's delightful. I mean, there's these great. He got all these great stories. And again, the DVD itself, the Blu-ray DVD itself, has all these additional features and stories. Like this thing is a testament. He got everything he possibly could onto a disc. About the John Peters, he would punch fenders to strengthen his hands so he could be a fighter, and it's he'd been in jail at some points. Like John Peters, this delightfully mad character. Just it was all tied into John. It was all tied into Jon Schnepp. Not turning these people away, not judging them. He went in without condemnation or judgment. He was an open minded guy. He had the he had that. He channeled that John Peters had a producer mentality, and he showed that the guy wasn't a bad guy. He was just a guy of his times, of the '80s.
Right, right.
And I guess the main thing I want to hit here before we just kind of get to where eventually we leave with Jon Schnepp. I love there's a happy ending to the story of Death of Superman Lives, where he and his girlfriend, they proposed to each other the night of the premiere of the project. So at the end, had this nice fairy tale ending to it all, where they became engaged, and in the end, he made this piece of history that sold you on the potential of a Nick Cage Superman. The image that I never thought I'd see in a billion years was Nick Cage in the classic red and blue suit.
Uh-huh.
It's it's what we get by the end of the movie, and it's amazing. Apparently, there was more footage. They couldn't show it all. They couldn't show it all its entire 45 minutes of footage. They had to skirt around for fair use and stuff. But I mean, they saw things that blew their minds and kind of sparked their creative flames into some projects that, unfortunately, with the passing of Jon Schnepp, probably won't be realized. And that's a shame. And that's kind of highlight a few of his projects. He was developing three things. So Jon Schnepp, he mentioned this he was on Fat Man on Batman with Kevin Smith and Mark Bernard, and Jon Schnepp. This speaks to the human spirit of the guy here, where Schnepp, he was so eager and such a fan. He was starting to get into these, and his fiance and Holly, his fiance Holly would stop him, say, "Hey, shut up! Don't say what we're working on. You can't do it." But he and Kevin Smith are geeking out with each other, like, "Oh my god, that sounds amazing!" And his projects, folks, I'm absolutely with Kevin Smith. These projects sounded amazing. The main one that really got me excited was he was going to do he was planning to do a TV series that was basically going to be in the spirit of Death of Superman Lives, about the untold stories of superhero films that were never made or never fully realized.
Now that would have been just something I would have ate up.
Let me tell you what the plans were, Tiki. At least what he gave away in that interview. He said they were going to do the Roger Corman Fantastic Four. Kevin Smith suggested the Josh Trank Fantastic Four. What happened there? The ones that were confirmed, though, again, the ones that you absolutely confirmed, were George Miller's Justice League, Superman Flyby, the J.J. Abrams Superman. All these things were going to be, they kind of happened upon stuff like Superman Flyby, and just it sparked creativity. Yeah, let's do it. And that sounded like such an amazing project. I was so down for it. And he's working on, there was a pitch for an animated show. He didn't really share any details about that, but again, these were all some projects in the pipeline. The biggest one, and this is where we kind of get the full kind of tragic circle here, folks. Here's kind of where the Comic-Con comes into play here. So Jon Schnepp, the man who sold us on a Superman movie, in a world of Elseworlds, why couldn't we get a Superman like this? He was going to do something that was very different but very cool, and such a project, something that we never talk about. He's going to do this project called Attack of the Shweddies, the Uber Nerd, Rise of the Uber Nerd, I believe that's what it was called.
And this basically would have been kind of an examination into essentially what the title says. It's kind of how nerdom became cool, how being a geek has become more and more embraced over time, and how people like himself have kind of lit the fire that sparked the rebellion, if you will, Dragon.
Yeah, but it was even cooler than that too. He had his main cell line, at least in the Kickstarter video. And it was tragic that it didn't. I was willing to donate to that, but unfortunately, it did not make its funding. I thought that was such an injustice after he did such great work on Death of Superman Lives. It was he was going to explore basically how comics and comic book movies influence each other, and how that dichotomy goes, how they influence one another, and how again, this is a thing that's rarely talked about, how the comic book industry and film is going up, but some people may not have full awareness of the comics. People, his main example is people know about Iron Man through Robert Downey Jr. They don't really know about Iron Man in the comics.
Sure.
And again, I was going to look at the balance. That was a really intelligent question. I was very eager to see explored. And again, I was always It was always said that that was never explored. And again, it was going to be very tied into Comic Con, him going to Comic Con and the San Diego Comic Con very specifically. Now that whole thing is the perfect albatross for what he was exploring, because it was the perfect kind of example, because the San Diego Comic Con is all Hollywood these days, where it's not exactly a comic driven convention these days.
Exactly.
You get some comic news, but basically that's what he was going to tap into. It was going to be his swan song, and unfortunately, it's just kind of and the bitter irony of it all, Tiki, is that again, it was a project that now we're left with a project. The man kind of shed light on the famous unexplored project, and he himself has a project that's unexplored. He has these great nuggets of projects that will be unexplored, and it's a shame.
All right, Dragon, I feel like that's a good place to end off, folks. Once again, please, I implore you guys, I have the link in the description. If you can't donate yourselves, at least share it with someone. Share it with your Facebook. Share it with some sort of social media. Holly and the rest of the Schnepp family need all the help that they can get. The bills for the hospital have been astronomical, and it's just unfortunate that they have to continue to be in such tough circumstances on top of the emotional circumstances they're under right now. So,
if I'm not mistaken, I believe the grand total is 150,000. Does that sound right?
well, that's the goal for the GoFundMe, Dragon. But I mean, for all I know, the bills themselves could be way higher. I don't know.
Sure, sure. Well, what I'm saying here is I bring it up because last time I checked, and again, this is last time I checked, it was earlier today, and I'm sure it's gone up because again, and this is what I think is so delightful about just the legacy of Jon Schnepp is that I was so uplifted in seeing that the GoFundMe went up to like last I checked it was like 130 out of like 150 in like just a few days.
Uh-huh.
And I just again that shows you again the swell of support. Like I believe the boys and girls at Collider they've they've been running kind of the highlight reel of Jon
they've been
Schnepp
running a highlight reel,
for all day. It's been like the 20 if not 24 hours. It's been going
at least for the next 24 hours, if not longer.
Exactly. I mean, that's commitment. That's a guy who impacted a lot of lives. That's a guy who, again, he was the voice for the Uber nerd. He was he was the voice for the Schweddies. Today I was crestfallen and seeing I was pulling for him. And again, as I mentioned with Superman Lives, again, the guy had the strength of character. Really, I believe that he could have that he could have pulled through. But again, it's a horrible thing to happen to. But it's nice to see just the outpour of support and love and just what he brought. I mean, he made an indelible mark on not only Superman but on fan culture and just in superhero films in general. I mean, he left such an indelible mark, and it's something to be proud of. And I don't think we're going to forget. I don't think Schnepp's going to fall into obscurity. I think he's going to be one of those kind of those big names. And I hope my hope is that he inspires more people to kind of do what Schnepp was doing. Again, like you said, if Schnepp was the next Kevin Smith, I can't wait to see who the next Jon Schnepp's going to be. That's what I really look forward to.
All right, Dragon, well said. I think we can end it off right there.